Hi, I'm Rachel, crowding into Missy's space as I do. Not sure she'll stay here forever, but this is my AM reading video for Friday, January 24th, 2020, and she's gone. I'll just straighten the covers here and get to the video. I have a fair amount of books to talk about that I've finished since the last video, or am in the middle of, or hope to get to soon. I believe since the last video I finished the audiobook of John Scalzi's The Collapsing Empire, which was a lot of fun for, you know, the end of the world, sci-fi, science fiction. Definitely looking forward to getting to the second book. I think I'll use an Audible credit to listen to that one too. Will Wheaton was a pretty evocative narrator, although sometimes I think he went a little over the top, but some of the characters were a little over the top too. But overall it was just very entertaining, and it still had, you know, interesting, good message about what to do in the face of overwhelming evidence that maybe we should get our shit together to save humanity. But man, that politicking is just so much more fun, I guess, or lucrative to the bottom line. So yeah, all going well there. I also finished The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, just starting my Toni Morrison reading year with her debut. Very artfully done novel about various characters in early to mid-century Ohio. Black characters largely dealing with the intersection of their lives with broader society, where you know, beauty is seen as a white construct, and we have sort of this class system in a way along skin lines about lighter skinned black people like Geraldine, this reserved young mother, and what she goes through. We have darker skinned seen as less civilized people, and what they're going through, particularly through the Breedlove family, and the titular, or not titular character, but the character who interacts with the title, Pekala, the young girl Pekala, who desires blue eyes because blue eyes are seen as beautiful. And so it's a lot about how Black people, and particularly children, are perceived physically speaking, and how that plays into their self-worth or self-deprecation. Just, yeah, I mean, the language was beautiful. I talked in an earlier video about feeling like I was in the room with Pekla and her neighbors. Finally got to say a few words about this in the Voxer community for Toni Morrison 2020. So that was nice too. And I'm looking forward to moving on to her next book in February. I also just got this book in the mail today, as I'm filming on Thursday, the Toni Morrison Book Club. It was on my anticipated releases of 2020, but I think I misunderstood how this book worked. I thought that this reading group would be writing essays about each of Morrison's novels. In retrospect, I don't even know what I was thinking. I mean, especially since Morrison has written far more than her novels. But that's how I thought of it, like, oh, I'll just be able to read an essay after every book. But no, this is, it's more like a springboard. I think just reading all of her books are for personal memoirist essays in here. So I'm thinking instead of reading it piecemeal, I'll probably save this till the end of the year after I read all of the Morrison novels, and then I'll see how this book club was inspired by the novels and Morrison's other writings to write their own essays. So looking forward to it. I'm in the middle of a couple of books now, including this one, which I held up a couple of weeks ago, The Ice Cream Queen of Orchard Street by Susan Jane Gillman. This is a historical fiction novel sprawling about 70 years of American history. So I guess technically it starts in the historical fiction category. And I guess by the time we get to the 80s, people don't think of the 80s yet as historical fiction because it's still too modern. But that's getting rather nitpicky. Gillman creates a character based off of the people who started the crazy cat dance movement, maybe not, the soft ice cream serve movement, as it were, or business, I should say. This character, who is our first-person protagonist, is very rich and infamous and embroiled in controversy and indictments and things like that in the 80s, but we're going back to her beginnings, where she is a very poor immigrant to the U.S. who arrives in the country in 1913. No one's really paying attention to me, are they? But at least this video is fun. She and her Jewish family come from the Russian Empire after pogroms hit their area, and her grandfather has been murdered. In fact, they're supposed to go to South Africa to join her mother's brother, but her father secretly changes the tickets, you know, sold on the American dream of, you know, the paved streets of gold, which don't materialize. The family kind of implodes from there. They are all sort of stuck in this living room of the parents as boss. They're doing like tailor work. The kids are all sent out to find work, and, you know, it's hard living, and then various tragedies sort of strike. The father decides to leave, you know, walk out, and a typhus epidemic hits, and then our main character is hit by a horse, and is basically abandoned until the owner of said horse, an Italian immigrant, takes her into his family to care for her. So that's a lot of what I've read so far is about navigating these two cultures, which happen to be my two cultures, you know, Jewish family and Italian family. And my Italian family was actually, my grandparents especially were in New York around this time. So it's perhaps a little bit nostalgic in a way, or in a family history sort of way. And in putting in this first-person narrator, Gillman has this very snarky voice, basically, of someone talking to us from the present, quote-unquote, and looking back at her past, and putting down all of her opinions about everything from how, you know, the romanticization of the tenements, you know, is ridiculous, and that it was, you know, just horrible and vile, and you know, commentaries on world events like World War I and the Spanish influenza, all sorts of lovely stuff going on in here. And now we're even starting to get a little bit into the present, like, you know, jumping back and forth in time, talking about her relationships with her children and grandchildren, and this indictment stuff where apparently she's been accused of bad practices with child workers. Ironic, really, because, you know, when she was a child, you know, they didn't have quite as many laws on the books about that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, it's not, you know, to get my snob head out, this isn't, you know, incredibly literary writing. It's, you know, perfunctory. It does the job, and in fact, it's probably much more accessible with this narrator. And I'm finding it very engaging. I'm reading relatively slowly because mostly I've just been reading on my commute. But I'm making a little bit of a dent, and I'm hoping to make more of one over the weekend. Hopefully I do have some other stuff coming up, but I am finding it very engaging, and I am impressed at how she, you know, is able to advance the personal story of her character throughout her life, while also bringing in like details about, you know, historical events happening at the same time without making it sound cheesy or boring or anything like that. So I think a lot of people might like this one. So yeah, I'm glad I read it. I've already suggested it to my dad. Well, my dad reads slower than I do, but I try to keep his TBR list well fed. This book I'm actually listening to on audio. I'm about 2/3 in right now. This is The Gallery of Vanished Husbands by Natasha Solomons. You know, I have it here from the library in paper form, but I have, you know, such as my reading time is, I figured I wouldn't be able to get to it if I had to carve out the time to read it like this. So I went to the library between these two books and found out that I could actually get this one on audio immediately. It's kind of a shame because I think out of these two books, this one would work better on audio because, again, the writing is less literary and the voice of the first person is compelling in a, snappy way. But it wasn't available. This is the one that was available, and the writing in this book is a lot more lyrical, and so I'm enjoying it on audio, but I think I would have, in a way, this would be more preferable for me to actually read. But such are things. This is a story that takes place in 1950s London with the Jewish community there. Our main character is a woman named Juliet Montague, which seems kind of on the nose. She is an aguna, which in religious Judaism, it means a chained woman, basically. That's the parlance for it. It means that her husband has abandoned her, or, it could be that, when a husband perhaps is missing in action in a war or something like that. But in any case, she's married, but the husband isn't there anymore, but he also hasn't granted her a divorce, which in Jewish religious law is the only way a woman can get divorced. So she's a guna because she's chained to this marriage to a man who ran out on her 8 years ago. And for the most part, she's just sort of making do. I mean, one of the fascinating things about this novel, I think, is, getting to see the interplay of Jewish culture and then UK culture, I guess. There's this sort of proprietary middle-class English thing going on here that, feels a little bit foreign to me. And at the same time, I think it plays into the way that Judaism has manifested, where it's like a little bit of Orthodox and a little bit of conservative-esque Judaism, or maybe like ultra to modern Orthodox. The lines are so polarized now sometimes between like ultra and modern Orthodox, but in the past it wasn't always that way. So, she's not like living like a ultra Hasidic life, but she's close to that in a way. Anyway, she's just basically she's in a cloistered community. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows what happened to her. There's a little bit of gossip and a little bit of pity around it, but for the most part, her parents support her where they can. She's working for her father in his ocular shop for eyeglasses, and kind of scraping by and making do, caring for her two children. But then on her birthday, she decides to do something rather rash, and she runs into a painter, like selling his wares, like on the street even. And for some reason, well, they get into it where he paints a portrait of her, and this harkens back to something that happened in her youth, where a Scotsman who was buying, eyeglasses from her father decided to pay by painting a picture of her, which her husband later stole when he left, and it felt like a piece of her was missing ever since. And it turns out she has a huge appreciation for art, and this relationship with this painter, who comes from an incredibly posh, well-off family in the countryside, blossoms into something where she opens a gallery with him and his painter buddies, and curates the art for this gallery. And it's kind of scandalous because it takes her out of her cloistered community, and it's on, I guess, both the Jewish and middle class levels, not seen as respectable as maybe it could be. But anyway, it opens up her life. It gives her, a fresh new identity, something that's sort of almost like reclaiming part of herself again from this, injustice that's basically been done to her that she can't really get out of in her religious community. I mean, one thing I have to say about both of these books in Judaism is that, it's sort of back to that, Judaism isn't shown in the best light here. We have these two characters, two female characters even, who more or less are trapped by it in a way. She's, trapped into this marriage where really she should, be able to live her own life by now, and is sort of falling out of favor with all of the traditions around Judaism because she's sort of too much of a free spirit for the way that her community is organized. And so in a way it feels like her community is rather oppressive. I mean, it's not too over the top, but it's, I guess, a little bit. I mean, over the top. And in this one, you know, her Jewish family, which is always incredibly sort of stereotypically shrill and overwrought, you know, pretty much abandons her piecemeal after her accident, and she is taken in by an Italian family and even gets baptized. And so, you know, she keeps some of the Yiddish phrases, but that seems to be about it. I don't know. Well, I'll learn more as I go through this novel. But anyway, once again, you know, this isn't about, neither of these are about people enjoying their interactions with Judaism. And in a way, it's kind of frustrating to me, you know, always having to see this negative side of Jewish life. But it works for both stories, I should say that. And this one is working well for me, you know, for all of this commentary on art, especially, you know, the visual arts. There's a beautiful visual style to this novel. Solomon's is just a painter with words, to go into that hyperbole. It's kind of beautiful to listen to. And anyway, I think coming back to a comparison between these two, I'm thinking about like which character is my favorite, and you know, the protagonist, who was named Malka by her family and then turns into the baptized Lillian in this novel, you know, she has that quirky voice and, you know, is sardonic and snippy, and it's first person and she's in your face. So, you know, I can be kind of drawn to her as a character, but I feel like, you know, Juliet, aside from her name, has all of the nuance, you know, where it's about navigating the fact that she's like too free-spirited for her Jewish enclave and too prim for a lot of the aspects of the bohemian art world of London 50s and 60s. And there's a little bit of a conceit in here that might be a little too over the top for me, where she's like painted over and over again by the men who are part of her gallery, which, I don't know, seems like, you know, a little too I guess Mary Sue is the word that comes to mind, just because, you know, we all want to see ourselves as so special. But the way that Solomons writes this character, she just seems much more grounded and believable to me, and the things that happen to her, I'm struggling with academically, but as I think I read or listen to the story, it just all seems to be flowing so nicely, and I'm just really still appreciating the character and all of her nuance. Not a perfect novel, but I think it is pretty good. I'm enjoying it. I'll let you know how it ends. Speaking of various forms of reading, I am also reading an ebook, which I don't read a lot of ebooks. I like the tangible, and I also like audiobooks and for certain types of books. But I do have a collection of Best American Short Stories. And for these past several years, in January, I start my year more or less by reading the most recent one. So right now I have added the Best American Short Stories of 2019 to my collection on my tablet. The guest editor for this edition is Anthony Doerr, who mostly sticks out to me because of his famous novel, which I haven't read, but I think it's one of my mother's favorite novels ever. So I'm wondering if I should see if she'll read this short story collection. I don't know. Actually, so far, well, I've read 6 short stories so far, and it's kind of a slow start for me. I feel like a lot of times I'm more in love with the first stories of the collection than the last stories of the collection. But for the most part, these stories haven't been sticking out to me as much so far. The one that has the most is the last story I read, which is No More Than a Bubble by Jamel Brinkley, which is about these young men who are at a party, and, you know, it's sort of a mating ritual with a couple of girls where they're obviously flirting and trying to hook up together, but it's a lot into those sexual politics, and the main character harkens back to his father, who was a little bit of a ladies' man as well. So it just worked for me as sort of a very brief character study. I liked it. And this is the other book that I really want to finish over the weekend, probably more than The Ice Cream Queen of Orchard Street. I'll privilege this one and then move on to The Ice Cream Queen of Orchard Street second. And then, finally, as what should probably be my final read of January 2020, I have the last book that I meant to do a page 112 challenge with. These 2 books have been on my Goodreads TBR the longest, and as per what I've done in I think 2018 mostly, I pit two books on my Goodreads TBR against each other, read page 112 and decided which one I'd, go on with and which one I would chuck. But in this case, I decided that I already knew which one spoke to me more. So anyway, this is the book I'll actually not read, and I should say these are both YA novels with Jewish themes, and this one is called Odette's Secrets by Marianne McDonald. It is a Holocaust novel, and I try not to go too overboard with Holocaust novels, and I already have read a few things that are sort of in that vein or coming into that vein perhaps, so it's just not speaking to me to focus so specifically on the Holocaust right now. Meanwhile, this one, because I can remove the interlibrary loan thing, is called Believe by Sarah Aronson. I believe it won the American Jewish Library Award several years back when I put it on my TBR. And it is a modern book, and I'll read from the flap. When Jamie Collins was 6 years old, she was the only survivor of a suicide bombing that killed her parents and dozens of others. Media coverage instantly turned her into a symbol of hope, peace, and faith, of whatever anyone wanted her to be. Now, on the 10-year anniversary of the bombing, reporters are camped outside her house, eager to revisit the story of the sole survivor, soul as in S-O-U-L. Jamie doesn't want the fame or the pressure of being a walking miracle, but the news cycle isn't the only thing standing between her and a normal life. Everyone wants something from her, expects something of her. Even her closest friends are urging her to use her name recognition for a worthy cause. But that's nothing compared to the hopes of Dave Armstrong, the man who, a decade ago, pulled Janine from the rubble. Now he's a religious leader whose followers believe Janine has healing powers. The scariest part? They might be right. If she's the sole survivor, what does it mean that what does she owe the people who believe in her? If she's not the sole survivor, who is she? So yeah, the part that intrigues me the most about this story is about surviving, a suicide bombing. It seems prescient to things that happen with more regularity than perhaps they should in our times. I'm not quite so positive, I guess, about, the magical realist aspect of whether or not she has powers, but that depends on how it's dealt with in the story, so I'm not going to try to prejudge before I get into it, and I'll be hoping to get into it soon. So that about covers it for me now. Missy, my cat, has calmed down. She's off camera but still on the bed. I should be getting into bed soon, but exciting weekend stuff coming up ahead. The day I post this, which is Friday, I believe the BookTube SFF Awards will be making an announcement on their Twitter. I've been following along as they've introduced this year's judges. I'm very excited. I don't ever participate all that thoroughly in the BookTube SFF Awards, but for the past couple of years I've nominated books at the very beginning of the nomination process, and I always look forward to the judges and their live stream at the very end of the process, several months in, after they do all their read-alongs of the shortlist and decide on their favorites. So that's very exciting. But the BookTube prize I am involved in, the BookTube prize, that is also revving up in a big way this weekend. Robert at Barter Hordes on the BookTube prize channel will be announcing the official long lists for fiction and nonfiction for 2020. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited and, antsy, because after he does that, he'll email all of us judges with what ballot we'll be judging, or if we will be judging, or if we'll be standby. But basically, I need a reading list so I can get books from the library or wherever I need to get the books from. So yes, I am very excited, and I'm sure I will be back on Sunday to talk about all of that. And maybe with the BookTube SFF Awards as well, all of the exciting literature I love to read in SFF and fiction and, I guess nonfiction. At least I'm dipping my toe in. So yeah, stay tuned. And thanks so much for watching, everyone. And I'll see you next time.